Wow, guys, I just finished editing a video and I checked the YouTube feed for Nintendo Hot Takes, and for the first time in a while, I see RGT85 doing his thing. It's time to say goodbye to Nintendo Switch. What a complete joke. What an absolute travesty. Haven't watched the video yet, but we are going to do a reaction to this real quick. Typical RGT clickbait, I'm sure.
So since 2017, the Nintendo Switch has been a bit of a behemoth for Nintendo as far as
It's a bit of a behemoth. It's well on its way to being the best-selling console of all time. You know, it's been a major success for Nintendo. The fact that like he's understating it already says a lot about what this guy's motives are for this video. Like unbelievable.
I guess maybe repairing their image a little bit in the eyes of consumers after
Repairing really.
the Nintendo Wii U. Many people thought that that could potentially start to be the downfall of Nintendo as a brand. When the Switch was first unveiled, it was like, well, how is this going to work? But it definitely took on a life of its own. I feel like it did a lot better than most people expected it to do. Myself,
Everybody knew this thing was gonna be successful. Like, what is this nonsense? Like, oh, people thought Nintendo was on the way out. Like, clickbait journalists and like pretendos were pushing that narrative, right? It was never something that actual fans believed would happen, right? It just no.
self included, I had my doubts when the Switch was first unveiled. I kind of wanted a powerful home console, but
The powerful home console needs to die. Okay, the powerful home console meme needs to die. Okay, like overpowered hardware is too expensive and limits the creativity of game designers by forcing the budget to focusing the budget on improving visuals and like fidelity instead of actually focusing on like art style and the actual game. Basically, like the powerful hardware thing is a complete meme. It's why we don't get any good PC games in the current year. It just doesn't happen, right? This idea that like Nintendo would be better if it just had stronger hardware is stupid, right? Having like affordably priced hardware has been huge for them.
as someone who appreciates handheld gaming and honestly plays a lot of his games in handheld mode, that's why I bought a PlayStation Portal, even though I thought it was a bad idea. You know, I definitely have enjoyed the time I've had with the Nintendo Switch, but you get to a point, especially with how technology shifts, that, you know, maybe it's time to move on. And I'm not even necessarily
Move on to what? What exactly are you going to play your Nintendo games on other than the Switch? Right? Like, what is out there that will let you play all of these Nintendo games in 2023? Like, what are you going to play right now that's going to handle everything that's coming out? Like, you know, Trace Memories coming out next month. You have like the Mario vs. Donkey Kong remake after that. You know, Princess Peach Showtime in March. You have like Unicorn Overlord coming out the same day, I think. Like we have like a lot of games coming out. You know, Luigi's Mansion 2, that the Thousand Year Door remake. Like we have a lot of stuff coming out in the next couple of months. Like why are you making this clickbait video? The reason is because you're just trying to push the narrative, trying to pretend as if you're concerned about the future of Nintendo. You are concern trolling. You are the definition of being a pretendo. Like, that's basically when I'm talking about pretendos, like, I'm talking about people like this who, like, create this, like, image of being a huge Nintendo fan but constantly do this thing where they're just like, oh, I don't know if I'm interested in continuing playing Nintendo Switch. Bro, like, real fans still play Super Nintendo stuff. You know, real fans still have, like, original hardware, you know, of decades old systems, right? You know, real Nintendo fans appreciate and love this stuff for what it does to them. This idea that like the Switch absolutely has to be replaced, otherwise Nintendo is gonna fail, is completely ridiculous. Like it makes no sense, right? It's just completely absurd.
Necessarily saying that I am moving on from the Switch, because I'm not. There's still some games coming out for it. But for Nintendo, I feel like the writing has kind of been on the wall.
Tears of the Kingdom and Mario Wonder were both huge successes. Okay. Like, I don't understand how Tears of the Kingdom is like, what, the third highest selling game of the year, only behind like Call of Duty and Hogwarts Legacy, two highly popular brands. Harry Potter's up there with like one of the biggest brands in the world, right? And then this game was like a really high budget game for them. Like they can put out something like Tears of the Kingdom, sell like 20 million units in like less than 6 months, right? Have this huge success story, have like an entire year filled with like fairly successful games. Mario Wonder, I think, is going to do really well lifetime. Actually, Mario Wonder alone, I think, is going to be a huge driving force behind Switch sales this holiday season and going into next year. Like, you can have all of these major success stories, and yet you're still going to have people like RGT come out and try to convince you that Nintendo is on the way out, that they can't remain competitive, that they're just going to lose out to the PlayStation Portal of all things, right? Like that's just patently absurd. Like this is like the equivalent of what was going on when the Steam Deck first came out, where people like seriously thought it would outperform the Nintendo console, which of course didn't happen. But Steam Deck did worse than Wii U, but you won't see these people admit that.
There's a myriad of reasons for that. But today's news definitely shows a shift for the Nintendo Switch and how it's time for Nintendo to move on from this platform. Now, what am I talking about?
Yep. Again, I'm not being a conspiracy theorist when I say that there's like a narrative being pushed among the establishment to try and convince you that like Switch is being replaced. Like you're seeing these people keep doing this, right? It's like a common reoccurring thing for them.
I'm talking about the latest NPD sales. Of course, this is what tracks physical game sales and hardware sales. Well, physical game sales for Nintendo, it doesn't track the digital stuff, but it tracks the hardware for Nintendo. And we always talk about the law of diminishing returns. We end up getting to a point where market saturation becomes a thing, and everyone who pretty much wants a Nintendo Switch has a Nintendo Switch. Sure, you could do variants and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, you're not really tapping into a new consumer market all that much when you've been on the market for 6+ years. Well, in these latest NPD numbers, the PlayStation 5 took a commanding lead for the month of November, with the Xbox Series being in second place and Nintendo Switch being in third place. Now, is that because the Xbox
The PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X had their best year ever. Okay, like this is going to be the best year they're probably ever going to have, right? Before they start declining in like the second half of the life cycle, right? Like PlayStation 5 and Series X has had an embarrassing console generation so far. The fact that like it's taken so long for this to happen, like it really should just go to show you just how irrelevant the PlayStation and Xbox brand is, right? Like they're nowhere close to catching up to the Switch, right? Like the fact that he's pushing this as a narrative that like, PlayStation and Xbox have outsold Nintendo this one month. Yeah, the month that they, the month that people were talking about the announcement for GTA 6, right? We knew the announcement trailer was coming in November, right? So of course, like there's some positive discussion for Series X and PS5 right now. They had a relatively strong year this year, right? Like of course they did well, right? Like I don't think that means Nintendo is doing badly though. And I think that's the mistake he's making here, is that like how does Series X and PS5 doing well for one month out of one year mean that like Nintendo was on the verge of going out of business, right? Like that's my issue with these kind of videos is that these people keep making narratives based on like this clickbaity style thing and just don't really just come to like this conclusion based on like information that doesn't like paint the whole picture, right? Because it's true that the Switch sales Switch has been on the market for a long time, right? It is true that like games are coming out and being hugely successful on other platforms, but that's not stopping Tears of the Kingdom from being a huge success story. That's not stopping new games from coming out. It's not stopping the Switch hardware from being profitable, right? I don't think he really understands that the Switch being on the market for so long really proves its long-term viability. Like I really think that he's completely delusional when he goes on about how the Switch needs to be replaced like now. And this is like the reason I'm so critical of Switch 2 talk is just like this complete nonsense. This mindset that like Nintendo is like perpetually on the verge of failure if they don't reveal new hardware. It's ridiculous.
Series and PlayStation 5 had some huge marquee titles releasing for it. I mean, not really. Of course, you did have Spider-Man 2 come out pretty recently.
This is the biggest year for PS5 and Series X period. Like the fact that he's seriously trying to say this, that there were no major releases for PS5 and Series X this year, that is completely objectively wrong, right? Like I said this was going to be a big year for PS5 and Series X at the start of the year. Like how does RGT like come away and say like the opposite, right? It's because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like
Recently. Great game, definitely worthy of a lot of people's admiration. But when you look in the Xbox side of thing, like what's garnishing all of these sales? And to that I say, it's the law of diminishing returns. It's the fact that we've hit this market saturation with the Nintendo Switch, where if you want one of these systems, you're gonna have one of these systems. Of course, software sales are always
This groundbreaking plant method is helping people lose weight while they sleep. Doctors have developed a method
going to be there for this, and it really kind of depends on what Nintendo is thinking with this, because software sales have been very successful for the platform. Tail ends of life cycles for video games on Nintendo Switch have definitely been a bit long.
What evidence do you have that this is the tail end of the life cycle? Right? Like when people say tail end, they mean like the last year of like the platform before the next platform comes out. There is no platform announced on the horizon. Like I can guarantee you that there will be a Switch 2 in 2024 at this point. Like honestly, at this point, I don't even expect to see it in 2025. So like the fact that this guy is still pushing this narrative that he has been for years, that the Switch 2 is on the end of its life cycle is just ridiculous.
Than on other platforms that Nintendo has released. So in that sort of standpoint, it's still a good thing. But Nintendo likes to sell hardware. They like to hit certain metrics with hardware. And when you see a pretty sharp decline year over year, especially during the holiday season, which of course is known as the biggest season for video game spending and just consumer spending in general, you kind of realize something. You kind of realize, hey, it might be time to move on. We, of course, have talked about the rumors and the speculation and the potential leaks.
All of which have been debunked by yours truly. Like there has never been an accurate Switch 2 leak in history. Like, remember the Switch Pro? Like, go fuck yourself, RGT.
Of Nintendo's next platform. And a lot of people, I've noticed a lot of people seem to be talking about this January thing. January is when we're going to see it, this, that, and the other. Not only does the January thing make absolutely no sense to me, but from people I've talked to, several different people, all of which don't talk to each other, that kind of know some things about this, they all told me that there is no January thing. And January doesn't make any sort of sense considering, well, the fiscal year doesn't end until March. So why would you do that? Like, why would you have people potentially buy your system over the holiday season and then literally the next month days after Christmas, you're like, hey, your parents bought you this outdated thing. We got something new cooking in the pipeline, and we're going to show it off in January. And it's not a great way to consider, consumer happiness or anything like that. So then when do we see this? And do we potentially see this? Because there is that one thought in the back of a lot of people's minds that Nintendo potentially holds on a little bit too long to the platform. They have done that with certain things. Of course, the Wii, they definitely held on a little bit too long. Wilson Phillips.
Nope. If anything, they should have used the Wii longer.
Would be, very proud of them for holding on to one more day. God, nobody's going to get that reference, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they held on a little bit too long. They thought that success was going to be longer standing, and then it wasn't, so they had to push the Wii U out the door, and we all know how that went. It's a lot harder to follow up a successful console than I feel like a lot of people want to give credit to, and there's a ton of different factors that go into the success. The software available on launch, the timing of the launch itself, what is making people want to upgrade to your next platform. But I definitely think, there's no question about it at this point in time. It's not to say that the Nintendo Switch is a failure or this, that, or the other, because it's not. It sold extremely well. It's going to go down in history as one of the best-selling platforms of all time.
One of the best-selling platforms, not the best-selling platforms. I kind of love the language used here. You can definitely see through his nonsense just by looking at that.
But if it didn't matter, if technological advances didn't matter, we would all still be playing NES. You know what I'm saying? At some point in time, when you have the available technology and other companies are doing things with similar technology, you have to adapt with the times. You have to adapt or die, essentially, as a company. So I just hope Nintendo doesn't take too long with this. I'm not expecting it in January, like I said. It's going to be after March, I feel. But a summer launch doesn't seem like a terrible idea,
Legit. 2024 summer launch, really.
Late summer, early fall sort of launch for whatever this platform is going to be, as long as everything is ready. And we all have to keep that mindset of, hopefully Nintendo's been preparing for this longer than people want to admit, because this isn't something you can just conjure up in a day or two and then push a system out the door. There's a lot of things that go.
What? Okay, so he's acknowledging the difficulties of releasing a console so soon. So why doesn't he just acknowledge the obvious and admit that it's not coming mid-2024? Why is he doing this thing where he's constantly pretending the console is coming out as early as possible, right? Why is he so obsessed with pushing this narrative? Because even he admits it doesn't make any sense. Even he admits January is too soon, but fall is fine. No, it's not going to happen.
Go along with that. There's a lot of things that go into research and development, of course, marketplace conditions and whatnot. So it's not something that you can just willy-nilly do. When you look at the Nintendo Switch, it's been a great run, but it's definitely showed some cracks in its foundation in terms of technological things. A lot of these games are starting to release with poor graphics, lower frame rate, features missing, and stuff like that. And
what does that have to do with hardware? Even if that was true, it's not. What does that have to do with hardware, right? If a game comes out with missing features or broken mechanics, it's the developer's fault. It is the software side of things. Why would you blame the hardware for that? You certainly don't see people blaming hardware for Cyberpunk 2077 or No Man's Sky, right? Why is it always inexplicably the Nintendo hardware that's the problem when it comes to these kind of things, right? The way I see it is that the fact that so many Nintendo franchises don't look and play the way that Zelda does, it goes to show you that there's a lot of room for evolution for smaller Nintendo properties on Nintendo Switch. My stance has always been that the Switch is capable of a lot more than people realize. And I think upgrading, releasing a new console before they have an interesting idea would be a mistake. I would rather the Switch stay on the market for like 10, 12, 15, 20 years before like they uh they pump out a new piece of hardware, right? Like there's no reason to do it if it's not necessary.
And that's not really a look you want to have, because you kind of make yourself look a little bit outdated. You kind of make yourself look a little bit obsolete in the terms of technology. And with
What gaming platform can do what the Switch does? Like what successful gaming platform doubles as a handheld? Like you can't name anything. Like the Steam Deck, don't make me laugh. The Portal, like iPhones can't, like, no, like the Switch has a dedicated niche that it dominates. Like why would Nintendo undermine that? Like why would they cannibalize their success on Switch by like trying to force out a new platform before the market really desires them to do it?
the rise of stuff like all of these new mini PC, handheld, cell phone gaming becoming even more impressive, stuff like the PlayStation Portal, the backbone that allows you to turn your phone into a PlayStation or an Xbox. Like there's a lot of competition out there in this space, and you don't want to wait too long because
Nobody is playing Resident Evil 4 remake on iPads. Like nobody. You are delusional if you think that like the consumers are ever going to like go for like the PlayStation Portal or any of this stuff, right? Like Nintendo fans are going to stick with Nintendo hardware because these it's a lot more polished than the competition. It's much more affordable. Uh, it's simply a better option. And that's what it all comes down to is that like, well, there's all these alternatives. Yeah, but they're not as good.
Nintendo's not going to come out with top of the line graphics. They're not going to come out with top of the line features in their system. There's usually a
Nintendo Switch games look better than the competition.
bit of a behind the eight ball with this because, that's just how the company has been producing systems for the past, few decades. So you have to look at it from that perspective. You don't want to wait too long to be an outdated thing. There's still great games coming to the Nintendo Switch, so it's not, a call to action to get rid of your system because, hey, there might not be backwards compatibility on that new system. And 2024, the first half of the year, does have a lot of games. Granted, a lot of them are remakes, but you got some third-party stuff as well coming from some developers. So it's not doom and gloom. This is not a doom and gloom video. This is simply stating the factual. It's stating the obvious when it comes to this platform. This platform has served its time. It's done what it's needed to do, but it's time to move on. When you are falling into last place in NPD sales during the holiday season, when you have things like sales and deals and bundles and stuff going on, and you're not able to sort of replicate your previous success, it's just because you've reached all of the people that are going to be primarily interested in you. So, don't take this as doom and gloom. Don't take this as negative Nancy or anything like that. It's simply just a sign of the times, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of people are ready for new Nintendo hardware to see what they're going to do, what sort of direction they're going to take. So let me know what you think of this in the comments section down below. Do you feel that it is time to say goodbye to your Nintendo Switch?
Yeah, of course. Like I was about to comment that like, he's not saying anything interesting. And yeah, 10-minute mark. Of course he is. I gotta wait for that sweet ad revenue to come in. Like what a joker. Like unbelievable. Like really? If you were really anxious for the next new Nintendo game, why are you not looking forward to like new Nintendo announcements? Like why are you not anticipating the next Nintendo Direct? And that's really all you have to say in regards to these people. Oh, there's nothing coming out in the first half of the year. They're just gonna drop a Nintendo Direct in February or something. They're gonna talk about like middle of the year games. Maybe give like a major holiday release, maybe something, right? Like the narrative that like nothing is coming out next year isn't gonna survive like a couple of months into 2024. Like it's such a weird narrative, even at this stage. It's like it's baffling to me that so many people are seriously trying repeating that treating that line like it's gospel right now. It's become like one of the go-to slogans for Nintendo Switch 2 advocates, Pretendos, since like the last direct. Like, oh, nothing's coming out this year. Well, what about Mario Wonder? Oh, it's not a major release. Well, what about Super Mario RPG? Oh, it's just a remake. Well, what about Trace Memory? Oh, it's just a remake. But what about Mario versus Donkey Kong? Oh, it's just a remake. What about Princess Peach? Oh, it's a minor release. They'll just make excuses. Like they'll just completely ignore all of the games that are coming out on Nintendo platforms in the near future, while just like making excuses for their behavior. It's disgusting, honestly. I hope more people start realizing that like RGT85 is a complete joke. I'll definitely be talking a little bit more about his hot takes. Like in regards to Nintendo in the near future, like I'm curious how he's gonna justify like Switch 2 not coming out in 2024. Like I'm curious if he's gonna say that like, Nintendo is making a mistake, or if that uh or whatever, right? Like the last time we saw like the Switch 2 like narrative get pushed back, like he was like very clearly upset about it. So I am I'm curious as to like what he's gonna do. But until then, I will see you all next time.